I helped my father grow his company into a $175 million empire in just 9 years. But during a family dinner, he shocked me by announcing, "Your brother will take over now." The next day, he burned my documents, saying, "I destroyed them so my company's information won't be leaked." I laughed hard because the documents burned were actually. The dining room was filled with the clinking of glasses, soft murmurs of conversation, weaving through the air. A celebration, they called it. A moment to honor the company's success. Lisa had worked for 12 relentless years to build Harper & Company into the powerhouse it had become. Then her father smiled, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder, and said the words that shattered everything. "Your brother will be taking over now." Lisa felt her stomach drop, but her face remained composed. Years of practice had taught her that showing pain was a weakness in this family. She forced a smile, raised her glass. "To Ethan," she said, voice smooth, controlled. Around the table, their family and business associates echoed her toast, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. Ethan met her gaze from across the table, a smirk barely hidden. That was the moment Lisa knew this wasn't just her father's decision. Ethan had been waiting for this. Their father had always been a traditionalist. A son should inherit the empire. A daughter's work was temporary, no matter how much she built. Lisa had taken Harper & Company from a struggling logistics firm to a $75 million industry leader. She had secured million-dollar contracts, introduced cutting-edge technology, expanded operations. Ethan had done nothing, yet he was the chosen one. That night, Lisa barely slept. She sat in her home office, staring at the company's financial documents, contracts, shareholder agreements. While her father had been making speeches and Ethan had been failing at every venture he touched, Lisa had been doing something else. She had been securing power. By 3 a.m., she knew exactly what she had to do. The next morning, she walked into Harper & Company as she always had. But today, it wasn't just her company. It was her battlefield. Lisa arrived at Harper & Company that morning knowing exactly what was coming. The air felt heavier, the usual of the office replaced by a tense quiet. The employees had already heard the news. Her father's announcement at dinner had spread like wildfire. Some averted their gaze, unsure of where their loyalty should lie. She ignored them, walking with steady confidence, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. She had exactly 15 minutes before her father and Ethan arrived. 15 minutes before they thought they would claim what was hers. She stepped into her office, shutting the door behind her. Her hands moved quickly, gathering the documents she had spent all night reviewing. Contracts, shareholder agreements, financial statements, proof of what she already knew. While her father and brother had spent years assuming she was nothing more than a placeholder, she had been securing her place. At exactly 9 a.m., a sharp knock echoed through her office. She didn't bother responding. The door swung open. Her father walked in first, exuding the same confidence he always did, like a king taking his throne. Ethan followed, dressed in an expensive suit, his smirk already in place. "Lisa," her father began, voice steady, authoritative, "I assume you're aware of the transition happening today." Lisa leaned back in her chair, eyes flicking to Ethan, who was already acting as if the office belonged to him. "Transition," she mused. Interesting choice of words. Her father's expression twitched with irritation. He was used to her compliance. "Not this. There's nothing to discuss," he said, his tone sharpening. "Ethan will be stepping in as CEO. You'll help with the transition before moving on." Lisa exhaled softly, as if in thought. Then she smiled. "Dad," she said evenly, "I think you're mistaken about something." Ethan scoffed. "Lisa, don't make this difficult. We're trying to do this the easy way." She didn't respond. Instead, she picked up the remote from her desk and pressed a button. The screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a document, an executive shareholders agreement. Her father's face paled slightly. Lisa turned to Ethan, feigning curiosity. "Do you even know what this is?" He shifted. "A shareholders agreement," he muttered. Lisa nodded. "Good. And, do you know what it says?" She tapped the screen, highlighting a clause. "It states that any transfer of executive power requires approval from the majority shareholder." She met her father's eyes and let the words sink in. "And I," she said, voice calm, controlled, "hold 60% of Harper & Company." Silence. Her father's jaw tightened. Ethan's smirk vanished. "That's impossible," Ethan muttered, stepping closer to examine the document. Lisa tilted her head. "Actually, it's very possible," she said. "Over the years, while you were busy failing at every business you touched and Dad was busy believing bloodline mattered more than ability, I was doing something else. I was securing my position." Her father's hands clenched at his sides. "Remember when you needed capital for expansion in 2017? She continued. "You signed over 15% of your shares to me. And in 2019, when we had that legal battle, Another 10% was transferred under my name. That, plus my original 35%, makes me the majority shareholder. Ethan's face turned red. You can't do this. Lisa pulled out another document. This is the most recent legal filing. Want to verify it? Ethan snatched the paper, scanning it quickly. His expression twisted in panic. You manipulated this, he spat. Lisa leaned forward. No, Ethan. I planned for this. Her father finally spoke, his voice strained. Lisa, you're making a mistake. Lisa exhaled slowly. No, Dad, she said. You did, the moment you decided my work didn't matter. He straightened, regaining his composure. This company was meant to be a legacy for the family. Lisa held his gaze. And I am the only one who built it into something worth inheriting. Her father's silence was answer enough. Lisa turned to Ethan. You have two choices. You can stay but you will work under me, or you can take a buyout and leave. Ethan's face burned with humiliation. His hands curled into fists before he shoved the paper back at her. You'll regret this, he snarled before storming out. Lisa watched him go. She had expected nothing less. Her father lingered, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. He shook his head. I never thought you'd do this. Lisa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I never thought you'd make me. For the first time in her life, he had no response. With a final look, he turned and walked away. Lisa sat back in her chair, her office suddenly feeling bigger, quieter. She had fought for this moment. She had won, but as she stared at the empty doorway, she couldn't shake the quiet truth settling in her chest. This war had cost her more than she had ever expected. The whispers started almost immediately. Lisa felt it in the way her employees hesitated before greeting her, the way department heads avoided her gaze. The news of her takeover had spread, and with it, her father and Ethan were working in the shadows. They were calling board members, longtime executives, even investors, painting Lisa as ruthless, unfit, reckless. Ethan, ever the manipulator, played the role of the betrayed son, speaking in hushed tones over expensive dinners about how Lisa had stolen the company from its rightful heir. Their father didn't have to say much. Just a carefully placed sigh, a shake of the head, a subtle, I only ever wanted what was best for my children. The game was clear. They couldn't beat her legally, so they were trying to erode confidence in her leadership. If they turned enough people against her, they could force her out. Lisa wasn't about to let that happen. The emergency board meeting was scheduled within hours. Lisa walked into the conference room with her head held high. Half the executives looked away. The other half stared at her, waiting to see if she would crack. She didn't waste time. I know what's happening, she said, voice calm, controlled. I know some of you have been contacted. I know my father and brother are trying to turn this company against me. She clicked a button on the screen behind her. Let's talk facts, she said. The numbers appeared. Growth charts, financial statements, profit margins. In 12 years under my leadership, this company grew from a failing regional business to a $75 million powerhouse. Revenue has increased 300% in the last 5 years. We've expanded into 6 new markets, secured billion-dollar partnerships. She turned to Paul, the CFO. Do we have a single financial indicator suggesting that this company is failing under my leadership? Paul hesitated, then reluctantly shook his head. No. In fact, projections show another 20% increase in the next quarter. Lisa nodded. Exactly. She scanned the room. So, let's be clear. This isn't about my ability to lead. This is about power. The tension in the room thickened. Some executives shifted uncomfortably. Others remained still, too afraid to pick a side. Lisa let the silence sit for a moment before delivering her next blow. I also know that some of you have been offered incentives to push for my removal. The air turned frigid. She pulled out a document and slid it onto the table. Here's an email from my father to a keyboard member. Promises of bonuses, promotions, anything to secure votes against me. She leaned back. If anyone else here has been approached with similar offers, now is the time to disclose it. No one spoke. Lisa's gaze hardened. If anyone here intends to betray me, do it now. Because after today, I will not forget. Still, silence. One by one, executives who had looked unsure now sat straighter. Some of them might not have been loyal to her, but they knew siding against her now was a losing bet. Lisa stood. Good. Then let's move forward. Her father's next move came swiftly. A carefully worded press release. Subtle but sharp. Harper & Company has always been a family-run business. We are saddened by recent developments, but remain committed to upholding the values that built this company. Changes in leadership are inevitable and we hope to transition smoothly as we move forward. The message was clear. Lisa was reckless. Lisa was emotional. Lisa was unfit. News outlets picked up the story immediately, analysts debating whether she was too aggressive, too impulsive. Her father knew exactly how to play the game, but so did Lisa. She didn't release a counterstatement. She didn't waste time defending herself. Instead, she made one phone call to a journalist she trusted. "I have something for you," she said. An hour later, she sent over a package of documents, emails, financial reports, internal records. Proof that Harper & Company, under her father's leadership, had engaged in financial mismanagement, questionable business practices, and hidden debts that Lisa had spent the last decade cleaning up. The story broke within 24 hours. The fallout was immediate. The media turned. Lisa was no longer the villain. She was the savior. The woman who had saved Harper & Company from financial ruin. The CEO who had modernized and expanded the company while her father had nearly run it into the ground. Investors who had hesitated now returned their calls. Board members who had doubted her now stood in quiet support. And her father? For the first time in his life, he had nothing left to fight with. 2 days later, he called her. "You didn't have to do that," he said, voice tight. Lisa laughed softly. "Neither did you." He sighed. "What happens now?" Lisa exhaled, staring out over the city skyline. "Now," she said, her voice steady. "Now I make sure you never get the chance to take this company for me again." The phone rang late in the evening. Lisa stared at the caller ID for a moment before answering. "Lisa." Her father's voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "We need to talk." She leaned back in her chair, waiting. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "I didn't think you'd go this far." Lisa didn't respond. She had nothing left to prove. After a long pause, he sighed. "I'm stepping down. I'll be selling my shares. I'll keep a small percentage as an investor, but I won't be involved anymore." Lisa expected relief, but all she felt was finality. This was the end of the battle. "What about Ethan?" she asked. Her father hesitated before replying. "He's gone. Took the buyout. He won't be back." Lisa closed her eyes for a brief moment. She had won. But at what cost? Ethan didn't even fight. The moment it became clear that their father wouldn't be able to undo Lisa's control, he took the money and disappeared. She wasn't surprised. Ethan had never been strong enough to stand on his own. For years, he had relied on their father's protection, expecting power to be handed to him. But now, with no company, no influence, and no safety net, he ran. Lisa didn't chase after him. She could already picture him in some other city, trying to spin his next big idea, failing like he always did. But this time, there would be no one left to clean up his mess. For years, she had tried to convince herself that if she worked hard enough, if she proved herself enough, her father would finally see her as an equal. But she had been wrong. Now, she no longer needed his approval. A year passed, and Harper & Company thrived like never before. Under Lisa's leadership, the company expanded into new industries, secured record-breaking contracts, and surpassed the $100 million mark. The board that once hesitated now fully backed her. The investors who had doubted her now sought her approval. She had done what no one believed she could. She had taken the company from the hands of men who dismissed her and turned it into something untouchable. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just proving herself, she was building her own legacy. One evening, Lisa met her father for dinner, their first real conversation since everything had happened. He looked older, wearier. Not defeated, just different. "I read about your latest expansion," he said after a long silence. "It was a smart move." Lisa smirked slightly. "I know." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There was no tension, no battle left to fight, just quiet understanding. They both knew what had happened. They both knew how it had ended. But for the first time, it wasn't about the past. Her father lifted his glass to Harper & Company, he said. Lisa raised hers, clinking it against his. This time, there was no resentment, no need for validation. She had already won, and she no longer needed anyone to tell her so.